I spent a lot of time on my channel criticizing the stories of the Sonic games, talking about all their problems, explaining why they're poorly done, suggesting things that I think would have been better alternatives, or how stories could have worked a little more effectively. All this stuff. Oh, look at me, I'm Mr. Writer Man. I know so much better than the actual writers of the Sonic games. Well, wise guy, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? And that's what I've done in this video. I have come up with my own original story for a hypothetical Sonic game, and I'm gonna run through it kinda like I would one of my story videos. I'll go through the whole story and how it goes and how it plays out, but I'll also peek back behind the curtain, explain some of the creative decisions, what I was going for, what I was trying to do, why things are the way they are. It's a lot of fun. As an amateur writer and a super hardcore Sonic fan, naturally I'm gonna have countless ideas for Sonic stories swirling around in my head, and now I'm finally gonna put one out there and see what people think about it, and hopefully I'm not gonna make a giant fool out of myself and everyone's gonna realize that I actually have no idea what I'm talking about. But I don't think that'll happen, hopefully. I think I came up with a story that's pretty cool and that a lot of Sonic fans would be able to get behind. I guess we'll see. But before we get into the story itself, I want to talk a little bit about what it is and what I was trying to do, because yes, it is a new Sonic Riders story. Why Sonic Riders specifically? No particular reason. I have a lot of ideas for Sonic story stuff, and this was just one that was jumping out at me, and I was kind of just digging the ideas, and so I started working on this more and developing it out, and I'm like, yeah, let's do this one, I'm feeling it. It was actually inspired by the Free Riders No Connect patch that came out a while ago, because that effectively was like the release of a brand new Sonic Riders game for a lot of people. And I was thinking, like, we have a new Sonic Riders game, but we don't have a new Sonic Riders story to go along with it. And so that's what kind of got me, like, leaning on this Riders story that I had kicking around. And my idea going into this story was I wanted this to function as a conclusion to the Sonic Riders series, because we all know today that we're never gonna get another Sonic Riders game, so I want to give some proper closure to that little sub-series. And additionally, I am trying to keep this as faithful as possible to the 2000s era Sonic storytelling. This is actually, in my head, the third Sonic Riders story. This is a sequel to Zero Gravity. We're just gonna ignore the existence of Free Riders, and tonally I'm gonna aim for the kind of thing that you saw in a lot of 2000 Sonic games, including like story structure and stuff that I'll get into later. But also, I'm writing this as if this game had come out in 2009 or whatever, so there's gonna be no Infinite, no Sage, no Deadly Six, no references of any kind to anything beyond Sonic and the Black Knight, basically. But even within that, if you look at the original Sonic Riders games, they're very insular. They don't make any references to anything else in the Sonic universe, really. And I'm going to maintain that as well. We're not going to have Shadow or the Chaotix or the Soul Dimension. None of that's going to be relevant here. We're going to keep this relevant to Sonic Riders things, the Babylon Rogues and whatever they're up to, and we're going to keep it focused on that main cast. Additionally, like I said, this is a story for a hypothetical new Sonic Riders game, and I did consider that when I was writing the story. I tried to write this like a video game story. I wrote races into the story, and I put enough of them in there that it would feel like kind of the amount you would expect from a Sonic Riders game. Additionally, I considered what the game would call for and how that would affect the story. So, for example, I try to vary up the formations you're going to be playing as between Speed, Flight, and Power. I don't have in the story you do 4 races in a row as Sonic, because for a game purpose that wouldn't really work well. You want the pacing to vary things up, so I have, you know, a Sonic race, a Tails race, a Knuckles race, and then another Tails race, and then a Sonic race, and whatever. But also, when you look at the Riders games and their stories, usually the scene either before or after a race will be, like, more focused on the character you're going to be playing as, so that did inform the story a little bit. And within that, I also considered the way the Riders games are made, where you have kind of like zones, where you'll have one track in the hero story, and then you'll have its equivalent track in the Babylon story. And clearly a part of that is to reuse assets so they can make more tracks in the game more easily, and so I considered that as well, and I try to have, like, similar race environments for both the Hero and Babylon stories, so you could imagine what track would be getting remixed in each of the stories. As well as some other things, but we can get into that as we go. I think it's about time we get started on the story of Sonic Extreme Riders, and that's a terrible placeholder name because I couldn't come up with anything better. But the title does refer to what is the main gimmick of this game, because actually we're not getting into the story, I just realized. Because of course the first thing in a Sonic Rider story is going to be the pre-rendered opening cutscene, and these don't just serve to kick off the story. All of the pre-rendered cutscenes in every Sonic game also serves a purpose of introducing what this game is about and what its main gimmick is going to be. You know, you look at the Riders intro, and you see Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, and then boom, we got these new bad guys that show up, and then Sonic gets on extreme gear, and he starts riding, and it's like, okay, that's what we're doing this time. Zero Gravity, it introduces the little meteor things, and oh shit, we're messing around with gravity here. So when I was trying to come up with what the opening cutscene of this game was, I realized, even though I'm not making a game, I'm not designing anything here, I do need to come up with what is the main gimmick of this hypothetical Sonic Riders game, because that's going to inform what the aesthetic of this story is going to need to rely on. And that left me stumped for a while. I was struggling to come up with an idea, but I finally came upon something that I think is pretty cool. Rather than some kind of mechanical gimmick, the gimmick of this game would be in the racetracks. My idea was that all, or at least most of the tracks in this game would be in some way dealing with extreme weather conditions. I'm thinking hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, lightning storms, tidal waves and flooding, volcano eruptions, those kinds of things. That would be the gimmick for this Riders game. And I'm imagining tracks where, you know, you have massive winds and you have debris being thrown around as hazards you have to avoid, but it could also potentially open up new tracks where there's an earthquake on the second lap and now the track breaks open and now you're going underground on a new route or something like that. That's what I came up with, and then that kind of ended up turning into really great inspiration to build the story concepts off of, and I ended up really happy with how it all came together. So we'll see how that goes. But now, let's actually properly get into the story of Sonic Extreme Riders. The story kicks off at the X-World Grand Prix, specifically the X-World Grand Prix that Sonic references at the end of Zero Gravity. That's where Jet says, "We haven't settled who's the fastest in the world," and Sonic says, "Okay, we'll settle that at the X-World Grand Prix." And that was kind of left unsatisfied. I suppose maybe Free Riders was supposed to be that X-World Grand Prix, but that sucked and it didn't really follow up that story at all. So again, I'm ignoring that. This is the sequel to Zero Gravity, and this is that X-World Grand Prix. And we're actually opening on the finals, where it's Sonic and Jet racing with each other. And I'm imagining the pre-rendered cutscene it opens. We have like shots of palm trees gently blowing in the wind on a futuristic city. And then, phew, we see Sonic and Jet pass by, and the trees get, like, bent and blown by the wind trailing after them. And we hear Omo-Chow as the announcer describing how this is the most intense race I've ever seen, and that kind of thing. And we get a couple of shots of the other Babylon Rogues, and Tails, Knuckles, and Amy all watching from the pits, cheering on for their racers. And we get some cool shots of just Sonic and Jet racing each other, overtaking one another, doing some fancy cool shit. But then we see a shot in the distance of this ominous tower starting to emerge from, like, the nearby mountains, and it's got, like, a ring around it that starts, like, spinning up, and a massive storm starts to form from that tower, and it kicks up and gets more aggressive and more dangerous, and then it starts to spread into the city. We have really intense winds that start coming through and messing stuff up, but Sonic and Jet are still racing anyway, and, you know, you have Omo-Chow announcing that, like, wow, the winds have really picked up out of nowhere. But then they start to get way worse, and it starts to get really dangerous, so we start having debris getting chucked around, and it starts to, like, go into the stands, and then it's like, okay, this is becoming really bad. And then we have some big piece of debris, like the equivalent of like a bus or something, but it'd be all sci-fi and Sonic Riders-y, and that starts flying towards the pits where Sonic's friends are, and we hear Amy, like, shout out for Sonic to help her, and he immediately, like, turns back around and, like, gives up on the race to go try to help, and Jet's like, hey, where are you going? We haven't settled this. But then he sees that Storm and Wave are also in trouble, so then he goes back to help, and then I'm thinking Amy gets, like, pulled into the winds, and she starts getting thrown around, and she's freaking out. And Jet is actually the one that manages to save her. And then I'm thinking Jet offers to Sonic and friends to come to their airship that they have tied down, and they can try to hide and wait out the storm. So they all agree to do that. And this is where the first race of the game would begin, because this is a thing they do in the Riders games. It's not always races, especially in Zero Gravity. They do a lot of action scenes that gameplay-wise function as races, and so that's what this is. This first race would be you playing as Sonic, going through the stormy, windy city, trying to get to the Babylon Rogue ship. And then after the race, everyone arrives at the ship and everyone starts filing in, but before Jet gets in, he sees someone that really catches his attention, and he heads out to go after them. And Wave's like, "Where are you going, Jet? It's too dangerous." And he's like, "I'll be fine. You all just stay put. I'll be back soon." And we see Wave with a worried expression on her face as the door to the airship closes. And then inside the ship, we have all the characters kind of regrouping, trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm also thinking that Knuckles, like, insults the interior of the Babylon Rogue ship. And then Storm's like, "What?" And they start, you know, doing their thing, fighting with each other like they do all the time. But Tails cuts them off when he starts to look into some stuff, and he sees that there are news reports of these strange towers appearing all over the world. And immediately they assume this must be Eggman's doing. So, of course, they decide to head over to that nearby tower and see if they can't shut it down and figure out what Eggman is up to. And Wave, again, is like, "Are you guys serious? You're gonna go out there?" And Sonic's like, "Don't worry about us. We'll be fine." But he does tell Amy to stay here because it is dangerous, and she doesn't look happy about it, but she complies, and the three head out, which would then lead into the second race, where you play as Tails, and I'm imagining that they're, like, at the foot of the tower, and there's a tornado that's formed around it, and there's, like, a bunch of debris and, like, chunks of land floating up around this tornado, so the racetrack is, like, spiraling up to the top. And once you complete that race, then the heroes get to the control room at the top of the tower or whatever, and Tails starts digging into the computer, and he finds that, yes, indeed, this tower is Eggman's, and he manages to disable it, but he can't stop any others from here. However, he does see that there's, like, a central server that this tower is receiving from, so maybe they can head there, and maybe they can shut down all the towers from that and put a stop to whatever Eggman is doing. But also something Tails notices here is that the protocol that's making these towers generate all this intense wind is called a search, and Knuckles is like, "Oh, what is he searching for?" But it doesn't say. They don't know. Ooh, mystery. And then, of course, Sonic says, "Well, why don't we go ask Eggman ourselves?" So we cut to the heroes now already in Eggman's facility, and he comes up on, like, a really big screen on a wall laughing, saying that they fell right into his trap and the door behind them shuts or whatever. He explains that he intentionally had that signal lead to this facility so he could bring them here and take them out once and for all. And then a hangar door opens to reveal 3 new characters that we've never seen before. 3 bird characters. That's right, we got OCs in this story, baby, but trust me, it's gonna work out. It's cool. Hold on a second. So the leader of this trio tells the heroes that they're not gonna be leaving this place alive. And Knuckles gets angry, he steps forward, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we'll see about that." And the leader, very smugly, is like, "Yes, we will see, won't we?" And after he says that, the White Owl character of the trio jolts off screen. It's so quickly you barely even see him. It's like he disappears. And Knuckles is immediately like, "What the heck? Where'd he go?" And the Tails is like, "Knuckles, above you!" And you see he's, like, up high, using his wings, and then he's gonna come down and attack Knuckles, and he barely manages to dodge out of the way, but before Knuckles can even get his footing and face the Owl character again, he's already behind him, and he, like, gives him a really solid blow, and basically he just wails on Knuckles for a while, totally destroying him. He moves so fast and so silently that Knuckles struggles to keep track of where he is and gets wrecked, and he gets very beat up, and is left lying on the floor, barely able to stand, and Sonic and Tails rush to his aid. And they're like, "Who the heck are you guys?" And then the leader is very arrogant and he says, "Don't you know, we're the world-famous band of thieves, the Babylon Rogues." And then our heroes are like, "The Babylon Rogues? What?" Knuckles tries to stand up and face the Owl character again, but Tails is like, "No, Knuckles, you're too injured. We gotta get out of here." And then the Crow character of this trio speaks up, and she says that's not happening. But then the leader interjects, and he says, I say we let him try to get away. It'll be fun. Why not? After all, this is the world-famous Sonic the Hedgehog, the new fastest in the world. I want to see what he's made of. So he tells the heroes to get going. That'll give him a head start, and with Knuckles injured, they do just that, and that is what will lead into the third race, where you play as Knuckles going through this Eggman facility filled with all kinds of traps and hazards and stuff. And then after winning that race, the heroes would get away, but we would see a scene of these new Babylon Rogues characters where it's clear that they actually let the heroes go away, and the Crow scolds the leader, saying they shouldn't have let them escape, but he's like, whatever, they're no threat, nothing to worry about. And then our trio regroups after getting away, and they're like, what the heck, who are those guys? And so they decide to go back to Jet and his crew to ask who these new Babylon Rogues are. But since they turn off the wind machine, most likely they've gotten moving, so how are they going to find them? But then Tails points out that Amy should still be on their ship, and he should be able to track her extreme gear. So they then leave to go find the Babylon Rogues. But we are not going to follow that up right away, because I am introducing a change-up to the traditional multiple point of views that they do in Sonic stories like this, in hopes of kind of addressing some of the problems of that story structure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like I said, I'm imagining this as a new Sonic game, and that means you can experiment and mix things up. Even in the games we've already had, they've changed up how they did the multiple stories before. So I'm just adding a further evolution to that. What I'm doing in this game is you're going to have chapters, and by completing one chapter of one story, you will unlock the next chapter of another story. So we started here on the hero's story, that's the only option available to you at first, but now that we've completed Chapter 1 of the hero story, you unlock Chapter 1 of the Babylon story, so now we go over to that. This, I think, helps to improve the pacing, because we're not revisiting scenes we've already seen before, but also we're not seeing the full story before rewinding back to the beginning to see further context of things. We get that context doled out more when it's appropriate for the story, and I think that's going to result in overall a better pacing to things. And we will talk about these new Babylon Rogues characters in a bit, but first I want to just go into the Babylon story, because we're actually starting with those new characters. The Babylon Rogues story begins actually with a flashback. It's all like sepia tone or whatever. And we see that same trio of characters, and they've just pulling off some big heist, and they're now making their escape from some facility. And this is what I was talking about. This would be the equivalent to the stage we just played. It's an Eggman facility in the hero story, but now in the Babylon story, it's like some bank or whatever, some tech building in the past that they're now escaping from, and there's security chasing after them or whatever. And this is where we're going to take some time to introduce these characters a little bit more and kind of their traits. So we have the trio of rogues, and they're all riding forward on their extreme gear, and then we see a bunch of security robots block their path, and the leader tells Mute to take care of them, and the big owl rushes forward and knocks them all out of the way with ease. And then the Crow character says that she's disabled the outgoing security alert, so there's going to be no authorities coming for them once they get out of this building. And she comments that she could have also shut off the security in this facility itself and made this really easy, but then the leader says, where'd be the fun in that? And while they're riding along, he asks Talon how their extreme gear are performing, and she says that, as always, her tuning is perfect, all their gear are operating at 300% efficiency. And Gale, the leader of this trio, says that he would expect no less, and then some more security forces show up, and then he does some crazy extreme gear, like fancy shit, to really show his mastery. He's like on a totally different level than anyone else when it comes to riding extreme gear, even Sonic and Jet. And with all of his fancy maneuvers and his tricks, he like creates wind trails that take out all the robots, and the three of them rush forward to escape the facility, and that would be the first race of the Babylon story, playing as Gale, the leader of this trio, as they escape. But then after you complete that race, we then go to a first-person POV of Jet as a child, and he's looking up to Gale as he explains what happened there and how they escaped. If it isn't obvious by now, Gale is Jet's father. I wanted to do this because I wanted to continue the tradition of the Riders games being very Babylon Rogue-centric with their stories, but I didn't want to do more crap with Babylon Garden and, like, ancient Babylonian stuff. We've done that enough, so I wanted to go in a slightly different direction and riff off of something that was lightly alluded to in the first two Riders games, which is Jet's father. He's briefly mentioned in those, but we don't really know anything about him. So I was like, okay, that'd be a good place to build off of, exploring Jet's father. And then I started to think, well, if we're bringing in Jet's father, how about I make it into a full trio for him, so he has his own speed, flight, and power, and it's like the previous generation of Babylon rogues. I thought that was a pretty cool idea, and like even from like a game almost marketing perspective, it would be exciting to see like, oh, who are these three new mysterious characters in this new Sonic Riders game, you know? And huge shout-outs to Dash1426 and Stupid Fred Zero on Twitter. They're the artists that did the designs and art for these new characters. I commissioned them to do it, and we worked out how I want their designs to look, and they came out so great. I'm super happy with these characters. Obviously, you can see Gale, Jet's father. He's reminiscent of Jet in his design, but he also uses some aspects from some early beta designs of Jet. I thought that would be fun. And the other two I really like as well, especially Talon. I friggin' love how she came out. She looks super cool. But anyway, back to the story. So we got a flashback to a young Jet talking with his father, and they're outside of their airship on like an observation deck or whatever, and it's night, and there's a comet visible in the sky with like a green aura around it. And Jet thinks his dad is the coolest. He's like super awesome, badass Babylon rogue, expert thief, master extreme gear rider. He really looks up to his father a lot, but I'm also imagining even as a child, Jet's a little bit of a shit, so he says that one day he's gonna become even faster than his dad and steal even more treasure. And Gale chuckles to that and says he has a lot to learn first. He can barely even stay on an extreme gear. But then Jet says that's not true anymore. He's been getting a lot better lately, but his dad is always away on jobs that he never sees. And Gale's all, oh really? I didn't know that. Well, I guess you're gonna have to show me sometime. And he apologizes that he hasn't been around as much as he'd like to. And the young Jet asks if his dad is going to be staying for a while this time, but with a pained expression, Gale says no, he isn't. He's got a really big heist plan, one that he's been building up to for a long time. But he promises that after he gets back, he'll stick around for a while, and Jet can show him how good he's gotten at extreme gear. And Jet asks if it's going to be dangerous, and his father says it is, but nothing I can't handle, of course. Have you picked up that this guy's supposed to be full of himself yet? And he also says to his son that he'll be back before Jet even notices. After all, he's the fastest in the world. And after he says that, we pan up to the comet in the sky, and then the sepia tone fades out, and we pan back down, and now it's present day, and we have Jet standing on the balcony looking up at that comet again. And Wave comes out and asks why Jet's still awake. It's the finals tomorrow, and he needs to get some rest. We've rewinded to before the opening of the hero story. And in response, Jet throws the same question back to her. Why is Wave up? And she says that she's been working on tuning his gear and getting it ready for tomorrow. And he asks, well, how is it? And she says that, as always, my tuning is perfect. Your gear is operating at 200% efficiency. And, you know, in response to that, thinking about what his father told him in that story, Jet's response is just like, And then he goes back to looking up at the comet in the sky. And he says the last time that comet came around was the last time he saw his old man. And Wave kind of looks uncomfortable in the situation. She doesn't really know what to say to Jet. And he tells her to get some rest and that he'll be going to bed soon. And Wave starts to head back, but before she leaves, she says that, you know, Jet, your father was... But she cuts herself off, and she's like, never mind, and she leaves. And Jet continues to stare off. What you think of that so far? Pretty cool, I like to think. I was thinking about Jet's obsession with wanting to beat Sonic and be the fastest in the world. And I was like, what's with that? What's the deal with that? It could just be, you know, Jet's very competitive and he just wants to be the best, but I was thinking, you know what would be an even cooler idea is if we tied that into this whole story here. Because something I haven't mentioned about Gale is that he is a falcon. He's a peregrine falcon specifically, and I made him that because the peregrine falcon in real life is the fastest animal in the world. And so I'm thinking, like, back in his day, before Sonic was around, Gale was the fastest in the world. And then Sonic takes that title, and so Jet, looking up to his father so much, he wants to take that title back for himself. That's why he's so insistent on wanting to beat Sonic, wanting to be the fastest. And if it wasn't obvious enough, the implication there is that Gale died, or at least Jet thought he had died off on that last job that he was going to do. Because they never say in the Riders games where Jet's father is, but I always got the impression that he's dead, so I wanted to, again, riff off of that, but say, what if he actually wasn't dead? What if he is still around and he's back now, and how's that gonna play out? Because then the next scene is we cut back to that opening cutscene when everyone was heading back to the Babylon Rogues airship, but then Jet sees someone, and he goes out to chase after them, because the person he sees vaguely in the distance looks like his father. And he's like, what? That can't be possible. And so he goes to chase after them. And that would then be the second race of the Babylon Rogue story, playing as Jet, chasing after his father in the Stormy City. And once you complete that, then Jet catches up to this person he's chasing, and he says something along the lines, you're 50 years too early to be taking me on, kid, and we get this reveal that it is, in fact, Gale, and Jet's, like, in total disbelief of this. But then we cut to the Babylon Rogues airship, where Amy is complaining that Sonic left her behind again, and Wave is plugging away at her computer, getting annoyed listening to Amy, and she tells her that, why don't you just go out there and take your chances against the storm, then? But if you want to stay in the ship, then you gotta be quiet so I can concentrate. And she comments that Jet's been acting strangely lately, and she hopes that he's okay. And Amy makes note of Wave's concern for Jet. And then we go into the next mission, which would be Wave looking for Jet, taking her own chances against the storm. But she's in, like, a different area. It's kind of like a coastal town, and there's, like, lightning strikes coming down everywhere. And once you complete that mission, we cut back to Jet and Gale, and we continue their meeting. Jet thought that Gale was dead, and Gale's like, oh, I'm hurt. I would have thought my son would think more highly of me than that. I told you that mission was nothing I couldn't handle. And Jet asks where his dad has been all this time, and Gale smirks, saying, searching. And Jet's like, searching for what? And Gale says that he's been searching for the breath of Terra. And Jet immediately gets dismissive, and he's like, that's just a fairy tale. And Gale says, no, it's not. It's real. That's what I learned on that job all those years ago, and what I've been looking for ever since. And Jet asks, well, why'd you never at least get in touch and tell us you were okay? But Gale kind of forcibly changes the subject, saying that after searching for all these years, he's come upon someone called Dr. Eggman, and he's working together with him to finally find the Breath of Terra, and that's what this tower making all this wind is for. And Jet's like, Eggman, I would not recommend working for him. You can't trust him. And Gale just laughs, like, I'm not working with him. I'm ditching him as soon as he finds where it is. And Gale walks up to Jet and puts a hand on his shoulder and says, the person I am interested in working with is you. What do you say? You want to help your old man out with this job and show him what kind of Babylon rogue you've become? And Jet's silent for a moment, but we see his fists begin to shake, and then he explodes out. Is this some kind of joke to you? You disappear for years and then show up out of nowhere and act like nothing happened? Jet is obviously pissed, but his dad has a wry smile on his face, and he says, I should have expected something like this. Look, I'm not interested in listening to a child's temper tantrum, and that just gets Jet even angrier. And Gale hands him a little data drive thing and says that when he's cooled down, this'll show him where Eggman is. If he wants in on the job, go meet up with him for the details. Gale's got somewhere to be, and he's about to take off, and Jeff is all, hey, wait! But Gale just leaves anyway. And that's when we see in the distance the storm generator tower thing turns off, as this is at the same time as Sonic and friends are over in that tower. And that's when Wave arrives, finally finding Jet, and she asks what's gotten into him and what he's doing out here. And then we have like a dramatic push-in on Jet as he looks at the little data drive. That then leads into the next mission, which is the Babylon Rogues following it to Eggman's airship, which is his base of operations for this story. Kind of like a Final Fortress type deal, but I'm imagining it's held up by like quad rotors, you know, going in on that wind motif that we're doing for this story. And once you complete that race, then the Babylon Rogues make it to Eggman's control room, where he's been expecting them. And he says to Jet that he assumes he's here to accept the offer, but Jet says he wants the details before he makes a decision. And Wave and Storm have no idea what's going on here, so when Eggman explains that they're searching for the Breath of Terra, they're both shocked by that because they thought it was just a story. And Eggman's all like, ah yes, you're familiar. According to legend, the planet itself is alive, and the winds that blow are the planet's breath as it inhales and exhales. But while that may just be a fairy tale, it is based on something that is very real, some sort of ancient artifact that produces wind and is apparently responsible for all of the wind on the entire planet. It is said that some ancient civilization created this artifact, taming the natural winds of the earth, and with it, they controlled weather itself, and that the Breath of Terra is still out there somewhere. Jet asks Eggman if he believes that the Breath of Terra is real, to which he says he does, and he's gonna find it with his array of wind machines that he's set up around the entire planet. With enough time to accumulate data, he can track the wind patterns of all these towers and locate an additional source of wind somewhere, and that's where the Breath of Terra must be hidden. Wave asks how much longer it's going to take to pinpoint its location, and Eggman says that it's probably a few more hours of data gathering. And he asks Jet, so, are you in or not? And Jet gets all snarky and says, seems like you don't even need me. You seem to have everything handled already on your own. And Eggman says, I agree, but this was a request from him. And Wave and Storm have no idea who he's talking about. But after taking some time to think, Jet says that he's sorry, but he's not interested in getting double-crossed again. And Eggman gets all offended, like, what? You think you can't trust me? And Jet begins to leave and says, that's exactly what I think. And that's it for that scene. I guess I'll take a minute now to talk about the Breath of Terra concept, because, again, I was thinking about the general ideas here of Eggman creating these wind machines and messing with the weather, and that would lead to the gimmick of the gameplay, but then I was like, oh, we can tie that into the gimmick of the story, too. Because, you know, the Babylon Rogues, they're all about riding the wind, being one with the wind, and of course Sonic himself is associated with wind, so I was like, yeah, some sort of artifact that allows you to control wind. Whoever has it will be the master of the winds, and so obviously the Babylon Rogues want that. I thought that was a pretty cool idea, and if anyone is wondering, oh, it's the Breath of Terra, like Gaia? Is it related somehow to all the Gaia stuff from Unleashed? Nope. It is completely unrelated, and I did that intentionally because I'm trying to be as authentic as possible to the writing of the 2000 Sonic games, and that means different teams not communicating with each other and stepping over each other's toes, doing similar things that are unrelated, and it's all weird and confusing. So all this Terra stuff and the planet being alive, completely unrelated to all the Gaia stuff. But yay, if you want to make your own fan theories, go right ahead. The only difference between this and the official stuff is that this is intentional carelessness. Anyway, we now cut back to the airship for one final scene before ending this chapter off. This is, I think, the largest section of the game without gameplay, but it's a pretty important, pivotal area of the story, so I think it's okay to get away with it this time. So we're back at the airship, and we see that, like, same camera angle that we see a lot in the Riders games, but we see another, kind of sleeker, similar-looking ship approaching it. And we have Wave and Jet in his office talking about the Breath of Terra. She's like, I can't believe it's actually real. Whoever got their hands on that would be the master of the wind. And Jet says he'd finally be able to beat Sonic with that and become the fastest in the world. But then Amy interjects and she's like, no one can beat Sonic. And they just ignore her, which gets her angry. But Wave asks why Eggman wanted them to get involved and who was he talking about. And that's when, again, we use that same angle we see a lot in the games. Storm bursts into the room and he's like, ghosts! And they're like, what? And that's when Gale comes into the room and he's like, what's that brat doing in my chair? And of course, he's got Talon and Mute with him, and we see that Storm and Wave are totally shocked by this. And Wave is like, Gale, Talon, Mute, you're alive! And Gale is all, Wave, Storm, long time no see. I see you've both grown up quite a bit since we last saw each other. How's it been taking care of this runt? And then Mute heads over to Storm, and they look at each other, and Storm shows a lot of respect towards Mute, but Mute doesn't say anything. He never says anything. But he kind of, like, puts his dukes up like he's ready to go, and Storm's like, oh, Master Mute, you want to spar? And then we cut away, but for the rest of the scene, we hear the sounds of Storm in agony as he just gets brutalized on by Mute. We hear him screaming in pain, we hear sound effects of him getting knocked around, we hear him begging for mercy or whatever. You know, that's just a funny thing that's happening in the background for the rest of the scene, pretty much. Meanwhile, Talon goes over to Wave and says that she's happy to see her, and she looks over at their extreme gear that they have propped up on the wall, and after looking over them, she says that it's not bad, but she can tell that Wave has been unmentored for a long time, and that she clearly has a lot to learn still. And Wave's actually kind of a bit, like, insecure about that. She's kind of upset hearing that, because Wave has always been very proud of her mechanic skills, so I figure having someone kind of put her in her place might be a nice dynamic there. And Wave asks Talon about her father, and she has this pained expression, and she shakes her head solemnly. And Wave says that she assumed that was the case. She assumed that all of them were dead, and thanks her for telling her. And if you're wondering where that comes from, in one of Wave's character bios, it describes that her father taught her all her mechanic skills. So I figured he was also probably on that mission where it was believed that all of them died, but these three have come back now, so Wave is wondering maybe her father is still alive too, but no, he is actually dead. Got a whole bunch anime dead parent syndrome going on here, but you know, it's like this one job that they all went on that went really bad. So I think it works. Anyway, of course, we then have Gale approach Jet at his desk, and he like puts his hands on the table, and he's like, "What's this I hear about you not wanting in on the job?" And Jet replies with an equal amount of sass and says, "I don't trust who I'd be working with. One of them has betrayed me before, and the other one is a no-good father that abandoned his family." And then Gale's like, "Huh? What kind of father would even want to come home to some spoiled, ungrateful brat? Ungrateful for what? Being left alone all the time? When you were gone, there was barely even a difference." But then all this arguing is cut off by, "Stop!" Amy yells. "I don't really know what's going on here, but you two are family, and you haven't seen each other in a long time, right? You shouldn't be fighting. You should be happy to finally be together again. Didn't you miss each other?" And Jet and Gale both silently look at each other for a moment before Gale's like, "Who's this girl? Is she your girlfriend?" And Jet's like, "No, she's not my girlfriend. She's nobody." And then Amy's like, "Hey!" And then Gale laughs and he's like, "She may have a point though. There's no sense in us arguing. You have every right to be angry at me. I suppose I have been a no-good father." And Gale starts heading out, saying he'll get out of Jet's hair, and Talon and Mute follow after him. But before they leave, Jet tells him to wait, and he kind of says it through gritted teeth, but he says that he's glad Gale is alive. And Gale doesn't say anything, he keeps his back turned, he just has this smirk, and he leaves. I'm pretty happy with that scene. I think it turned out really well. Lots of stuff is going on here, lots of character stuff, lots of setting things up and building off of what's been established so far. It's a really important scene for the story. And that's the end of the first chapter of the Babylon Rogues story. So in the game, you would then unlock the next chapter of the hero's story, and we're going to go back to them. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit more about these new characters, the previous generation of Babylon Rogues, and what I was going for and what I was thinking about with these characters. I already talked a bit about Gale, but some extra detail about the character and what I was thinking about is, when you look at the way Wave and Storm talk to Jet in the Sonic Riders games, they have a lot of respect for him. In Japanese, they use Sama as the honorific they attach to his name, and that honorific is normally given to people that you have high respect for. And interestingly, in the old character bios, Jet was actually listed as being younger than Wave and Storm, and it's pretty uncommon for people to use Sama when referring to someone younger than them, unless it's some kind of special circumstance, like it's a servant and it's like the child of their master, or maybe you use it for the child of royalty, or for someone really important. That kind of thing. So it got me thinking, I wonder if the reason that Wave and Storm show so much respect for Jet is not really for Jet himself, but it's because they had immense respect for his father, and so by extension, they give him similar respect. That then got me thinking, what is Jet's father? What is the previous leader of the Babylon Rogues like to warrant that kind of respect? And I came across this idea of, like, one, he's like one of the greatest Babylon Rogues that has ever lived, like the most prolific thief they've ever had in a very long time or whatever. But also he garners a lot of his respect through his presence and also through his skill. Like I said, he is completely unrivaled when it comes to his mastery of extreme gear, and that is why he was the previous fastest in the world before Sonic, so that's why he's so highly respected. And character-wise, I was riffing off the way Jet refers to his father in Japanese, because he doesn't call him Otosan, which is the more common way someone would refer to their dad. He calls him Oyaji, which is like saying old man, and it's pretty informal and a little bit disrespectful to call your father that, but it's not something too uncommon in rougher relationships, like you might see Yakuza call older members of the gang Oyaji or something like that. So, given that the Babylon Rogues are basically supposed to be pirates, I was thinking, okay, maybe that's the kind of relationship that Jet and Gale had. They had this very informal, rough relationship where they would insult each other and have this banterous attitude, but, you know, in a loving way. It's just that they, as characters, have this rough exterior, and that's how they connect. So then I was thinking Gale should be very arrogant, very full of himself, very prideful. You know, he knows he's the best, and he's just looking for a fun time. That's why, up to this point in the story, he's, like, let the security go off, why he's let Sonic try to get away, because he just wants to feel himself up and show off how much of a badass he is, because he's just looking for a good time. He doesn't take many things very seriously. And, of course, his name Gale is in reference to wind, because Babylon Rogues, riding the wind, all that stuff. And for his design, as I said, I was trying to riff off of Jet's design a little bit, but I also wanted him to be inspired by a surfer, because Extreme Gear and the way characters ride them, you might immediately think skateboarding, but if you really look at the way the characters ride, the kind of tricks they do, the way they ride on turbulence and how it looks like waves, it's pretty clear to me that Extreme Gear is supposed to be inspired by surfing. It's just instead of riding the water, you're riding the air. So I was thinking if we're going to have this ultimate master Extreme Gear rider, then he should kind of have this surfer vibe. So he's got the shark tooth around his neck, and he also has all these tattoos, because we see the Babylon Rogues characters have these kind of, like, flame tribal-looking tattoos around their wrists and ankles. And I was thinking if we have a character really embracing that surfer lifestyle and, like, going in way harder than anyone else, he should have way more tattoos than anyone else. To kind of signify that. So that's what went into Gale's design and what I was thinking with his character. But also, Talon and Mute are kind of an extension of his character and me trying to make him feel like he really deserves the respect that Wave and Storm give him in the games, because these two are essentially just his lackeys, his minions that follow him, and they are unwaveringly loyal to him, and these two are very strong characters in their own right. So if these characters will listen to anything Gale says, then that says something about his person and how much they trust and believe in him. And when it comes to these other characters, yeah, as I said, Talon is the mechanic of the previous generation, and similar to how Jet is, like, unrivaled when it comes to Extreme Gear, she is, like, a master mechanic, hacker, computers, all that kind of stuff. You know, she's on a totally different level. We're totally doing, like, the anime thing here, where you have, like, your shounen cast of characters, but then there's the older characters, the people that have been doing this for a while, and they're, like, way better and totally blow our heroes out of the water. But it's not just because these are my fan characters and I want them to be the coolest and the strongest. It all serves a story purpose. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Some of that's already been alluded to in this story, with Talon saying that she can get gear up to 300% efficiency, but Wave can only get it up to 200%. It's all setting up for something. But that's the reason that I made Talon a crow, because again, in real life, crows are the most intelligent species of bird. They're actually one of the most intelligent species in the world. I think third only to humans and dolphins. So I figured if she's gonna be this brilliant mechanic, then she should be a brilliant bird. And personality-wise, Talon is a very reserved character. She doesn't really show her emotion very much, and she doesn't really talk very much in general. She's very pragmatic. She only says what needs to be said, and she has this very sharp, keen mind. She's very attentive. She really pays attention to detail. She picks up on things that people don't pick up on. She's super observant, and of course, Talon, her name, is meant to allude to the sharpness of her mind, but also her personality. And then we have Mute, who is the muscle of the old Babylon Rogues, and as his name would suggest, he doesn't speak at all, ever. And that I did intentionally because now with the introduction of these old Babylon Rogues, we have a lot of characters in this story. We got Sonic and crew, we got Amy, we got the new Babylon Rogues, we got Eggman, now we got this trio. That's a lot of characters, so I kind of wanted Gale's henchmen to be lighter as characters and not have too much going on to keep things from being overwhelming, which is why Talon doesn't speak very much and why Mute doesn't speak at all. But also, it does tie, once again, into the species, because I made Mute an owl, specifically a snow owl, because in real life, owls can fly silently, and that's how they're such effective predators, so I kinda took that and ran with it. Mute is silent, both in the fact that he doesn't speak, but also he is a very effective combatant that way, which is why he was able to beat Knuckles by moving really quickly and silently, so you can't track his movements, and he can take you out really easily. Once again, he is one of the strongest fighters the Babylon Rogues have ever seen, which is why Storm, as the muscle of his crew, shows him a lot of respect. And I imagine Mute as an owl, he's kind of like a bit like creepy and off-putting, because you know how owls do that thing where they'll like turn their heads almost completely around, or they'll turn them upside down? I imagine Mute does that, and he never talks, and he's got these big owl eyes, so he's just like staring at you, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But I actually think that would work really well for comedy as well. Like, I imagine someone walking by Mute in the hallway, and he doesn't say anything, and they walk past each other, and his head is just turning to track them as they walk by, even to the point where they pass each other, and he's looking backwards. He's just like, ugh, I hate it when he does that, you know, that kind of thing. I thought that would be pretty fun and give him a little something-something as a lighter character, and I'm very happy with how this previous generation of Babylon Rogues came out. I think they serve this story very well, but let's get back to the story so we can actually see why. So we're going back to the hero's story here. After completing that chapter in the Babylon story, we have unlocked the next chapter of the hero's story. And in case you don't remember where we left off, Sonic and friends just encountered the old Babylon Rogues, and now they are looking for Jet to ask who these people are. And we're just cutting right into the next race here, where you'd be playing as Tails, and he's looking for Amy, tracking her extreme gear. And this would be the equivalent track to the coastal town that Wave was in before, but now it's like flooded and being threatened by a tidal wave. And then you complete that race, and that would lead to Sonic and friends finding the Babylon Rogues. I imagine they have their airship parked in some sort of a mountainous region or some such. Amy is mad that Sonic left her behind, but they quickly get down to business, and Sonic asks about these other people calling themselves Babylon Rogues, what's their deal? And Jet says that he'll tell him if he can beat him in a race, and you're like, what? But Jet wants to finally settle the score once and for all, because the X-World Grand Prix finals were supposed to be that, but it was cut short because of this whole situation. And Jet wants to finally have his definitive race with Sonic to determine which one of them is the fastest, which of course Sonic is happy to oblige, and Wave is there like, oh brother. And that would take us into the next race, where you're playing as Sonic racing against Jet throughout this mountainous region. I'm thinking maybe earthquakes would be the hazard on this track. And of course, Sonic wins, and Jet is pissed, but he is a man of his word, and so he explains the situation, that that's his father, Gale, and it's the old Babylon Rogues, and they're back, working with Eggman, trying to find the Breath of Terra. And this is what I like about this altered version of the multiple story structures here. We already know all of this. We didn't just, like, have it explained to us in this moment with no greater context. Because I force you to do Chapter 1 of the Babylon story before you get here, all this stuff has been properly set up and established, as opposed to, like, Sonic Adventure 2, where when you get out of Prison Island in the hero story, immediately out of nowhere, the moon blows up, and you're like, what the heck is happening? Because you don't get to, like, freely play whatever story you want in whatever order you want, I get to make sure that you have all the relevant story context I want you to have up to this point. In reality, this is kind of a cheat, because it kind of undermines the whole multiple stories thing, because really, it is kind of just one story that I tell you as I see fit, but this framing makes it feel like there's still the multiple stories, and then you can trick people into being more okay with it. So anyway, our heroes are now filled in on the situation, and of course, they want to stop Eggman from getting his hands on the Breath of Terra, and at the same time, Jet wants to stop his father from getting his hands on the Breath of Terra, and Sonic asks why, to which Jet replies that that old man has gotten his way for far too long. It's about time someone beat him at his own game. He wants to see what kind of Babylon rogue his son has become, Well, he'll show him, so Jet proposes they all team up to stop both Eggman and Gale. They know the location of Eggman's airship, so together they can infiltrate it, steal the data on where the Breath of Terra is, and get to it before they can. Jet extends a hand to Sonic, to which of course he grabs his hand Predator style and is all, let's do it. And then we cut to a little bit later on, everyone's on the Babylon Rogue's airship, and they're just about to arrive at Eggman's airship, so they review the plan one last time. Sonic and his crew are going to go in first and try to draw the attention of Eggman's forces, and Gale and his crew and try to create a distraction. Meanwhile, the Babylon Rogues are going to sneak on board and steal the data on the Breath of Terra's location, and then delete it before Eggman and Gale can get their hands on it. And Amy asks what she can do to help, but everyone ignores her again. And Storm begins to boast that this will be no problem. In fact, they don't even need Sonic and his crew to help out. If anything, they're going to cause more of a problem. And then Knuckles starts arguing with him like, you're the ones that asked us for help. We've dealt with Eggman plenty of times in the past. We certainly don't need you here. And they start going at it again. And Wave breaks it up, frustrated that these two always have to argue. But then that will lead into the 6th mission of the game, where you are playing as Knuckles, leading the charge onto Eggman's ship for Team Sonic, again creating a distraction, so there'll be lots of cannons and defense systems and what have you that you'll need to be avoiding on the race. And then once you complete that, then the heroes make it to Eggman's headquarters on the airship. But once they arrive, Eggman is not worried at all. He's all cocky like, well, you've made it this far, but no more. This time, my Babylon Rogues will take you out for sure. And again, we get like a hangar door opening up, but with a pause for comedic timing, we see there's nobody there, and then self-destruct sequence initiated, and there starts to be a buzzer and red lights going off. It's like, what? What did you all do? And they're like, we didn't do anything. And Eggman's like, whatever, it doesn't even matter. I already have the data on the Breath of Terra's location. So Eggman starts to make his getaway in the Eggmobile, but then Knuckles puts a stop to him and, like, sends him flying Team Rocket style into the distance. And then our team gets a transmission call from Jet saying that Gale has the location of Breath of Terra, and they're en route to intercept them, and he, like, sends over the location. So then Sonic's like, we gotta get out of here and catch up to them, so our good guys head out. But that'll be it for this chapter, and now we're moving back over to the Babylon side of things, where we're gonna see the same events from their perspective. Here we start off, the Babylon Rogues have already infiltrated the ship, and we have Wave hacking into Eggman's systems, and she says that she's got the location on the Breath of Terra. It's in some mountain range to the north of here, and she starts to delete the files so they can make their way out, but this is where the old rogues were, and why they were not there to help Eggman against Sonic. Gale says that he feels conflicted. He doesn't know whether he should be upset or proud of Jet trying to get the treasure out from under him. And Jet says it's too late. We've deleted the files on the Breath of Terra's location, but Gale has a cocky smirk. He says that they've already taken that data for themselves. In fact, they're just about to leave. And then once again, self-destruct sequence initiated, and then Gale compliments Talon on a job well done, and she, like, tips her head, of course. And Jet's all, well, then we'll just have to get to the Breath of Terra first. And Gale laughs, you think you can beat me? You can't even beat that blue hedgehog. Face it, kid, you'll never be the fastest in the world. And Jet says, we'll see about that, and they all take off, and this leads into a race where you have the new Babylon Rogues and the old Babylon Rogues descending from Eggman's airship as it explodes, and I'm thinking this is like the equivalent race to when you're racing up the tower as Tails early on, one of Eggman's wind machines. Now we're kind of descending down one to make it back to the surface, and I'm thinking this one is like a blizzard, so we got snowstorms and low visibility and ice and whatever. And actually, after completing this race, that's already going to be the end of this chapter of the Babylon story. Very short chapter, I know, but we'll be coming back to it. But right now, things are kind of coming to a head, and this is going to be the end of the hero story in the way that you would see in the Sonic Riders games, where they kind of get like a not 100% satisfying sort of fake-out ending, and then we go a little bit further after that. We're kind of doing this here. So we are switching back to the hero story, and now all the crews have arrived at this kind of canyon range, and located here somewhere is where the ancient civilization that created the Breath of Terror would be. And so Gale proposes they get all three of these crews here. How about we settle things once and for all? How about a race? First one to the entrance to the ruins that house the Breath of Terra gets to keep it, and gets crowned title of fastest in the world. And of course, Sonic and Jet both agree to this, and this would be the final race of the hero story, playing as Sonic, and we have all three teams, all 9 characters, racing against each other throughout this mountainous canyon region. And I'm imagining in my head there are like a bunch of dwellings like carved into the canyon walls and rope bridges connecting them, but also there are like giant wind chimes hanging all over the place, like from the buildings, from the bridges. Because, you know, if this ancient civilization controlled the wind, then I imagine their culture is very, like, wind-oriented. And yes, we have another ancient civilization, because gotta have those in a Sonic story, am I right? So Sonic wins the race, and everyone arrives at, like, a giant stone door with some, like, ornate carvings on it, and Gale actually congratulates him, saying that he has earned the title of fastest in the world. Jet is angry, but he calms himself and says Sonic won fair and square, and that kind of settles it. Sonic is now the rightful owner of the Breath of Terra, and he can control the wind to his heart's content. But he's looking up at the door, and he actually turns away from it and says, not interested, and all the rogues are like, what? And Sonic says that the wind doesn't belong to anyone. And Jet wants to interject, but then Amy comes in yelling for Sonic, and he's all like, and they start doing their thing. And that would lead to what would be the ending of the hero story. But, of course, things are going to continue on, because once you complete that chapter, you unlock Amy's story. What? That's right, Amy's getting her own little chapter as well. Had her on the sidelines for most of this story, very similar to SA2, but now she's gonna get her time to shine, and Amy's story is shorter than the others, just one little race, but it kicks off in between the time of Sonic and Jet deciding to team up and them arriving at Eggman's airship, that kind of travel time between them, where I'm imagining Jet is once again on the observation deck of the Babylon Rogue's airship, looking up at the comet in the sky, and he's kind of a bit melancholy. And Amy comes in, and Jet asks what she wants, and she says that she wants to see the comet, but also she wants to thank him for saving her earlier, and Jet doesn't really comment on that. But Amy comes up next to Jet, and she like rests her arms on the guardrail, and she begins looking up at the comet as well. And she begins to explain that that comet is known as the Remorseful Visitor, and it's said that the spirits of those who died with regrets travel on the comet, and every time it comes by the planet, those spirits temporarily get to return to the land of the living and try to make amends with the people they've hurt. Jet's dad may have made mistakes, but he did come back, and he asked to work together with him. He's trying to reach out and make up for things. And Jet tells her that she doesn't know anything about him. He only cares about himself and his next big score. And Amy asks if that's true, then why did he come back? And Jet doesn't really have an answer. He stays silent. But then he says that they'll be arriving at Eggman's airship soon, and he leaves. How about that? Introducing a little bit of Amy's superstitious nature into the story, but without using friggin' stupid tarot cards. I think it's a pretty good scene for her, using her interest in those kinds of things to connect with someone and help them with something that they're struggling with. Felt very Amy to me. But then we cut to a little bit later on, when everybody else is on Eggman's airship doing their missions. Amy once again is left behind, and she sits there angry, watching from the Babylon Rogue's airship. But then the airship explodes from its self-destruct sequence, and she sees everybody making their way to those northern mountains, and she's like, they're leaving me behind again! But then she sees Eggman in the distance also heading for those mountains from a different path, and she decides to pursue after him, and that would be the race that you play as Amy. This would be the equivalent of going through those canyons, but in a slightly different area. And then once you complete that race, Amy catches up to Eggman, and we see that he's got, like, some binoculars, and he's looking at the door from a distance, and he sees all the other characters talking, and he's like, ah, well, those fools squabble, I'll get the Breath of Terror right out from under them. But then Amy shows up, and she's all, I don't think so. And Eggman's like, what? Oh, it's just you. Can you please not interrupt me? I'm busy. And Amy gets mad, and then she pulls off, like, the same move that Sonic did to Eggman at the end of the first Riders game, and launches him up with some wind, and he goes flying, and then she, like, strikes a victory pose, and is like, I've been practicing. And then she sees Sonic, and she runs over, and then that would lead into the end of the hero story. And upon completing Amy's story, you would unlock the last story. Here we go. Time for everything to come to a head. So we have all our characters at the entrance to the ruins that house the Breath of Terra, and Sonic's running around trying to avoid Amy, and Gale and Jet are just watching in comic disbelief. And Jet says he supposes that settles that, but when we cut over to Gale, he's like gone. He's like, screw that! If he doesn't want the Breath of Terra, then I'm taking it for myself. And he and the old rogues open the door and head in, and Jet's like, hey! And that, like, gets everyone's attention, and they all go into the ruins after. But they are stopped by Mute, who is blocking the way, and obviously he's not going to let them pass. And then Knuckles steps up and says, you all go ahead, I'll keep him busy. And then Tails is like, you can't, remember what happened last time? And Storm is also like, you're crazy if you think you can take on Master Mute. He's the strongest fighter the Babylon Rogues have ever seen. Even I'm no match for him. And Knuckles is like, well, you're welcome to turn tail and run if you want. And that kind of gets under Storm's skin, and then he steps up as well, and you have Knuckles and Storm kind of back-to-back, both ready to face Mute together. And Knuckles is surprised, and the two kind of smirk at each other, and Storm tells Jet to go on. They'll take care of Mute. You see, this is what I was talking about. It's all leading to things. Knuckles getting his ass kicked by Mute, and also that joke of sparring with Storm, and how he got his ass kicked, and the two of them butting heads constantly. All leading to this moment where it's time for them to team up. Individually, neither of them are a match for Mute, but together, And then that would lead into a race gameplay-wise, where you'd be in these ruins, playing as Storm, racing against Mute with Knuckles there as well. And then after completing that, we catch up with the rest of the characters, where they're now going deeper into the ruins, where now Talon is standing guard, and she apologizes, but she's been ordered not to allow anyone to pass. But there's no way she's going to be able to stop all of them, so who are they going to send to keep her occupied? And she looks at Wave and calls out her name, and Wave kind of like musters her strength and steps forward. And Talon tells the rest of them that they may go, and Jet asks if Wave's going to be alright, and she says that she'll be fine. So everyone leaves, but Tails kind of trails behind and keeps an eye on things. And Wave asks Talon, so what now? Are we gonna fight? And Talon says, of course not. She just wants to test her. She remembers seeing Wave as a kid, and even from a young age, she was always tinkering with extreme gear. And now she's so grown up, and Talon wants to see how far she's come, so she proposes a race. She will allow Wave some time to tune her gear to the best of her ability, and then they will see if she really has what it takes to call herself a Babylon Rogues engineer. And Wave agrees, and she begins working on her gear. Meanwhile, Talon is just sitting there almost completely still, just kind of watching, examining Wave's work. And Wave is a bit stressed, and she's kind of struggling with tuning her gear because she thinks it's as good as she can possibly get it, and she doesn't really know what to do to get more performance out of it, and she's starting to look a bit nervous. But then Tails shows up, and he suggests something she could do to maybe crank a little bit more out of her gear, and Wave's like, what the heck are you doing here? Leave me alone, this has nothing to do with you. This is about putting my pride on the line. I gotta prove myself. And then Tails says, well, if you want to prove yourself, then prove that you're smart enough to listen to someone that's trying to help you out. And Wave looks over at Talon, who's still just watching with her piercing stare, not really reacting to the fact that Tails is there. And after taking a moment to think, she hands Tails a wrench, and they start working on her gear together. Again, paying off everything we've been building up with Wave's character in this story, how she's not quite as experienced and not quite as skilled as Talon is, and she thinks she's the best, and she's very prideful about her work, but now it's the time for her to swallow her pride and accept some help from someone else, and then that would lead into the race of Wave and Tails versus Talon. And after you complete that, we then cut again to the remaining characters, Sonic, Amy, and Jet, as they get further into the ruins to the chamber that houses the Breath of Terra, where Gale is there. There's a big stone door with a bunch of wind. There's like whistling as it passes through all the cracks in the rocks, and we hear the sway of many wind chimes all over the place, and he opens the door, and we see what looks like a horn with wind billowing out of it. And that's when Sonic, Jet, and Amy arrive, and Jet's all like, "Hold it right there!" And Sonic tells him to stop, and Gale's all, "Why should I? The Babylon Rogues have always ridden the wind. It's part of who we are. It's only fitting that we get to decide which direction it blows. There's no treasure more valuable than that. Now, after all this time, it'll finally be mine." Gale grabs the horn, and immediately the wind kicks up even more, and then Amy gets blown off her feet, and she, like, grabs onto, like, a nearby rock or whatever, and Sonic and Jet are barely managing to keep their footing as all the wind is rushing past them, and Gale starts floating up, carried by the wind, and he's laughing, and he extends his hand to Jet, saying it's his last chance. Let's rule the wind together, and Jet and Gale look at each other for a time, before Jet says that the Babylon Rogues don't take handouts, we steal our treasure, and then Gale has an amused smirk on his face and says, "All right then, see if you can take this from me," and he blows on the horn, and then a ton of wind starts to come out of it, and it's like forming tornadoes or whatever, and all the wind begins to like swirl around him and form this giant like wind monster in his own image. And of course this is gonna be our final race boss fight encounter thing. And actually we cut all the way back to the very first shot of the story, those palm trees in the sci-fi city, and they're gently blowing in the breeze. But now that Gale has the Breath of Terra and he controls the wind, we see the gentle rustling of the leaves stop and they become totally still. The wind now blows for no one but him. To which Sonic then says, "Sorry, but I can't let you have that. I like running with the wind at my back." And he and Jet look at each other, and together they go to confront the super-powered Gale, and that would lead into the final race, the boss fight against Gale. And normally you play as Sonic during these, but I'm thinking it should really be Jet here, right? Either way, you complete this race boss fight thing, and I'm imagining the cutscene of them defeating Gale is like Jet makes some big tornado out of like a fancy extreme gear maneuver, and that like counteracts Gale's wind and creates like a momentary gap that Sonic then like flies and grabs the horn, and that then causes all the wind surrounding Gale to dissipate, and it's just him laying on the floor. And he starts laughing, and Jet's confused, but he's like, "Well, you got me. Nice job, kid." And he has a surprisingly genuine smile for once, and he looks at the horn in Sonic's hand, and he says, "To be honest, I wanted to give that to you, son," which has Jet surprised. But he says that he doesn't have much time left, and he wanted to beat the fastest and beat this guy, and he figured with that, he might be able to do it. So if he got that for him, then maybe that would make up for being such a no-good father. And we see Amy, she's grounded again, dusting herself off, and she comes up yelling like, "Why couldn't you have just said that before? You two need to learn how to be more honest with each other. This whole thing could have been avoided if you didn't spend all that time arguing." And everyone looks at Amy, and Gale starts laughing, and he's like, "I'm starting to like your girlfriend." And Jet's like, "She's not my girlfriend!" And everyone laughs, and things calm down. And that's when we cut to the pre-rendered ending cutscene, where we see the Breath of Terra in Sonic's hands, and Gale asks what he's gonna do with it. He did win the race, so it is rightfully his, and Sonic looks at it in his hand, and he starts thinking for a bit, and then he smashes it on the floor, and a bunch of wind bursts out in all directions and starts flying out, and we see all the wind chimes around the ruins go still, but then they start moving again, and we cut back to those palm trees, which are still not moving. But then a gentle breeze begins once more, and they start swaying. The wind has been restored to its rightful state of being natural and belonging to no one. And Gale looks up at the roof of the cave, where there is just enough of a crack between all the rocks where you can actually see a little bit of the sky, and we can see the comet, the remorseful visitor there, but it's very, very dim. It's very hard to see at this point. And Gale gets up, and he gets on his gear, and he says, "Time to go." And he looks over at Jet and says, "You up for a race? You said you were going to become faster than me one day." let's see if that's true. And he takes off, and Jet's all, hey, and goes after him. And Sonic and Amy watch as the two race off, and they pass by Talon, Wave, and Tails. And we hear Talon congratulating Wave and that she's proud of her. But she also says she has something to tell Wave about the three of them returning. We then see Jet and Gale pass by Mute, Knuckles, and Storm, and Mute is kneeled over, heavily injured. Knuckles and Storm look pretty beat up themselves, but they are standing on their feet. And through really heavy panting, Knuckles says, not bad, and Storm replies, same to you. And once again, we follow Jet and Gale. Now they emerge from the ruins, and they're back outside in the canyons, with Gale out in front, and he's like, come on, you're never gonna beat me like that, you brat. And then Jet gets serious, and he does a bunch of cool, fancy shit, very similar to the stuff we saw Gale do at the beginning of the Babylon story in that flashback when he dealt with all the robots. He's doing, like, the same things his dad did before, and that helps him get past him. He's like, that's more like it. And the two of them go at it for a bit, racing each other, but more than anything, they're just kind of having fun together, enjoying spending time together, and we see a big smile on Jet's face. And same goes for Gale, and he passes by his son one last time, but then he looks up at the sky, and once again we see that comet, and it is right about to be completely gone. And we hear Gale mumble under his breath, like, that's it. Out of time. And then Jet passes by him with some fancy move, and he's like, come on, old man, you're getting distracted. And he starts laughing that he's out in front, saying, I told you I would be faster than you one day. And Jet looks back, and his father is gone. And he looks up at the sky and sees that the comet is also gone as well, and he's shocked for a bit. But then a solemn smile appears on his face, and he whispers to himself, so long, old man, and then Jet rides off into the distance. The end. What you think about that? That is my Sonic story, Sonic Extreme Riders, my pitch for a hypothetical new Sonic Riders game, trying to give some nice closure to the Babylon Rogues, and especially Jet as a character. Obviously, thematically, we're going for, like, a thing of a parent that neglects his child, and the child comes to resent him for that, and then he tries to make things right, but there's difficulties because of that. And, you know, we have that whole comet thing, the remorseful visitor spirits with regrets that get a time to come back. You know, Jet's angry at his father for he thinks that he just abandoned him for all those years, but actually, Gale, Talon, and Mute did die on that mission all those years ago, but this is their chance to come back and try to make things right. And Gale, struggling to, like, connect with his son in that kind of way, thinks, I'll get him what he wants, the opportunity to beat Sonic and become the fastest. But really, at the end, all he actually wanted was to be able to spend time with his dad, so you get that, and nice little happy ending there, and also tried to incorporate some of those Sonic environmental theming, the whole Breath of Terra thing, something that lets you control the wind, and Eggman wants to get his hands on that, and Sonic says no, the wind is a natural thing that belongs to nobody. Little did I know when I came up with that whole extreme weather condition idea that that would lean into such a fantastic little concept for a Sonic Riders story, am I right? At least I like to think it worked out pretty well. Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear some feedback on what y'all thought about this, because it's something I've been working on for quite a while. You know, I've done little things here and there with, like, pitching story ideas or doing rewrites of certain games, but this, I, like, really spent some time to try to write the best Sonic story that I possibly could, given the criteria of, you know, working within the limitations of a Riders game and how those stories work. And I'm pretty happy with the result. I put all my years of weirdo, obsessive Sonic fan knowledge in here to make this feel as authentic and true to the spirit of Sonic and the games and the Riders series specifically as possible. And at the same time, while I did say I wanted this to be kind of a finale for the Sonic Riders series, it does also kind of leave some openness there where you could do another one down the road if you wanted to. I imagine going forward at this point, Jet no longer feels this strong desire to become the fastest because that was fueled by kind of his complex with his father, but that's now settled. But he is still a very competitive person, and he likes going at it with Sonic, so now I imagine his goal is not to be the fastest. his goal is to be faster than Sonic, which ultimately means the same thing, but it's more of a positive, competitive rivalry instead of this kind of unhealthy obsession that Jet might have. And you could do any more number of little adventures if you wanted to. But I think this also works pretty nicely as a farewell to Jet and the Babylon Rogues and the Sonic Riders series. And I hope you enjoyed. Like I said, I have so many ideas for Sonic stories kicking around in my mind. This is just one of them. Who knows, maybe one day I'll write the story for a Sonic fan game or something. I'd be open to that. But until then, that's it for me, and that's it for Sonic Extreme Riders.